Lenore Vance did not answer Maya's question. She had something better than an answer, which was authority, and she used it the way she used everything, economically.
Get these two out of my command post. The contractor and the maintenance man. They're not staff.
He's been staff for 60 years.
But the guards were already moving, and they were polite, and they were enormous, and they were frightened, and frightened men follow the calmest voice in the room. The calmest voice in the room belonged to Vance. So Maya let herself be walked to the door, because the alternative was a scene that would end with her in a squad car instead of in the building, and the building was where the answers were. At the door she stopped, because the radios stopped her, all of them at once, a stutter of overlapping voices climbing over each other into a single shape, and the shape was a scream.
It's in the ICU return. It came up the ICU return, we have. Say again, say again. Oh God, it's in the unit. It's in the unit.
Vance moved. Maya would give her that. For the rest of her life, she would have to give her that. When the screaming started, the woman who had just spent 10 minutes protecting her assets turned the color of the people around her and ran toward the sound. And so the last thing the lockdown did before it fell apart entirely was deliver every important person in the building to the worst place in it at the same time. The intensive care unit was on sublevel 1, because in a hospital built into a Minnesota hillside, the most fragile patients went to the most stable, weatherproof ground, the deep ground, the ground nearest the water. 12 beds. 12 people who could not get up, could not run, could not in several cases breathe without a machine, threaded into the building by a dozen lines each. And every line, Maya understood as she came through the doors against the tide of fleeing scrubs. Every 4 bag, and every flush, and every drip, was water. Fresh water. A buffet of it, hung at the bedside of 12 people who could not move, in the deepest, saltless, most awake part of the thing's new world. It came up through the floor. There was a chase in the center of the ICU, a column where the plumbing and the cabling ran, and the access panel at its base was already gone, and the water was already across the floor in that same breathing sheet, and out of the chase, into the white clinical light, the thing finally showed itself entire. It was worse for being beautiful. Oceana had written, "I cannot name it," and Maya understood now that he had not been being literary. There was no name, because it was a committee of sea things that should never have shared a body, the long muscled coil of something eel-deep, finned along its length with translucent membranes that caught the light like oil on water, and where a face should have been there was instead a blunt questing prow that opened, and opened, and kept opening, ringed in glass. It had grown. Since the pool, in 2 hours, in the freshwater dark, it had grown, and it filled the center of the ICU like a train that had come up the wrong tunnel, and it turned its opening toward the nearest bed with the unhurried attention the therapist had described, the attention of something that had all the time in the world and 12 helpless meals laid out in a row. Maya did the arithmetic. It was all she had. The thing was between the beds and the doors. It moved in water, and it had brought its own. But it had paused. At the pool, in the ICU, it kept pausing. And the only time it had turned away from a room full of food was when the food was in salt water.
The flushes.
She heard herself shout.
Saline flushes. Every cart, every bed, there's saline. Throw the salt.
For one heartbeat, nobody moved, because she was a stranger with no letters that meant anything in this room. Then Eli Brandt, who had followed her through the doors because at 65 he had finally found the thing he'd been waiting his whole life to either run from or face, grabbed the nearest crash cart and tore it open and began throwing. Vials, bags, the little plastic bullets of saline they used to flush a line, fistfuls of them, hurling them at the prow of the thing as it reached for the first bed. The vials burst against it, and the thing flinched. It was not much. A car length of nightmare does not retreat from a thimble of salt water.
More salt.
Maya was shouting.
We need more. We need volume.
And even as she shouted it, she knew the flushes were a slap and not a cure, that they had maybe a minute of vials against a thing that learned, and that the only real salt in the building, the salt Oceana's leash had been made of, the salt that had kept it small for a century, was on sub-level 2 behind a door Lenore Vance had ordered no one to open. She turned to find Vance and found her already looking at the chase, at the thing, with an expression Maya could not parse until she did, and then could not stop seeing. It was not horror. It was recognition. It was the face of a woman looking at something she had fed.
You can't kill it.
She said it quietly, to Maya, under the screaming, almost gently, the way you tell a junior colleague a hard truth in a corridor.
Don't you understand yet? We've tried. It doesn't die. You can shrink it, you can starve it, you can put it back to sleep in the salt and pour another tomb. That's all anyone has ever been able to do. 100 years and the best minds in the world, and the only verb we have ever had for this thing is contain. So yes, the salt on sub-level 2 would put it down.
Her jaw tightened.
And it would take 90 years of the only regenerative line on Earth down with it. I will not make that trade on a Saturday because a contractor panicked.
Eli was out of vials. The cart was empty. The thing had finished flinching, and it had learned, and it turned the full black weight of its attention back into the room, and the nurses had 4 beds out and 8 to go. Maya looked at Vance, at the lab coat, at the good shoes standing in 2 inches of false ocean, and understood that she was arguing with the one person in the building who had known exactly what was coming and had spent her authority making sure the cure stayed locked away.
Then I'll make the trade. Eli. Where's sub-level 2?
No.
Where is it?
And Eli Brandt, 65 years old, his grandfather's last secret finally laid out in the open in front of him in all its glistening, ravenous length, wiped saline off his hands, and said the truest thing anyone said all day.
It's down. It's always down. Everything in this building runs down, and so does that.
He nodded at the thing, at the way even now it sought the floor, the chase, the deep.
You don't chase it, miss. You get below it. You get below it and you give it an ocean.